As the nation continues to be divided on issues of race, we find ourselves at a crossroads. Is it possible to transcend race in the United States? And if not, what's to become of us? On this episode of Race Talk with Lane and Eugene, certified emotional intelligence trainer Dr. Judy Morley explains why emotional intelligence is such a critical tool in the toolbox of every anti-racist. This episode originally aired July 7th, 2021. Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene. I am your co-host, Reverend Lane Cobb, here with my co-host, Reverend Eugene Holden. And our topic today is the relationship between emotional intelligence and effective anti-racist activism. Our speaker is certified emotional intelligence facilitator, Dr. Judy Morley. So we want to remind you that Race Talk is a loving, respectful, inclusive platform designed to encourage constructive dialogue around tough issues pertaining to race and social justice. It is a safe place for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions, to explore the nuances of systemic racism and grow their anti-racism muscles. In our Race Talk community, we practice radically inclusive love, even when we don't understand or agree with what is being shared. We listen with compassion and appreciation and empathy. Our goal here on Race Talk is that every person feel encouraged, feel appreciated, and feel heard, because on Race Talk with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. So I'm going to turn this over to Eugene. Please introduce our guest.
Hello, everybody. Again, this is Eugene, and welcome to Race Talk Revolution. And today I have the honor and the privilege to introduce Reverend Dr. Judy Morley. Dr. Judy Morley is a nationally recognized motivational and business speaker whose primary topic is personal transformation. She works with entrepreneurs and leaders to help them learn conscious business practices, purposeful leadership, and emotional intelligence, which is, of course, the topic of today. Dr. Judy has been described as a human potential specialist, helping people find their unique gifts across different levels and industries. Her years of experience vary from being an advertising agency owner to a college professor to an executive to an entrepreneur and franchisee owner. She is even an ordained minister. I was her music director back in Colorado. Each of these positions have given her great insight into helping people find their authentic style of leadership. Dr. Morley holds a PhD in American history and a master's degree in conscious leadership, as well as being a certified emotional intelligence facilitator. She is the author of multiple essays and books, including 5 Spiritual Steps to Overcome Adversity, Using the Cosmic 2x4 to Hit a Home Run. She has been featured in several documentaries, including Empower, Empowering Women in Business, and Beyond. Dr. Morley is currently the president of Intuitively Speaking, a coaching firm located in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So I just want to, again, welcome my dear friend, my beloved friend, Dr. Judy Morley. And if you don't mind, Judy, could you define for our family here what emotional intelligence for us? Please define that for us and tell us why it's important in terms of activism.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugene. And hi, everybody. It's so great to be here. Thank you, Reverend Lane and Reverend Eugene, for having me. And it's nice to see some friends here. So emotional intelligence has been found over the years. I'm sure most of you have heard the term. And over the years, emotional intelligence has been found to be a greater indicator of success, not just in business, not just in academia, but in life than IQ. And the thing about emotional intelligence is that unlike your IQ, which most psychologists say is pretty much set at birth, you're born with the IQ you're born with. You might test differently at different ages depending on how distracted your brain is or whatever, but your IQ is pretty much set. But your EQ, or your emotional intelligence, is a skill that you can learn. And since it's a skill that's such a great indicator of success, it's very important to know about it and understand it. And I think when it comes to the topic of Race Talk Revolution and anti-racism and social justice, I think that the important thing about it is that we need to be aware of what we're feeling when, if we want to be effective in any sort of interpersonal interaction on a micro level or on a macro level. And so emotional intelligence helps us know what we're feeling when. Eugene, I don't know, Eugene and I talk all the time, so I don't know, do you have another question, or did you just wind me up and want me to go?
Yeah, let me let me ask this. When you and I and Lane were speaking a few days ago, you shared with us your opinion that humanity is at a crossroads and that we are unable to process our feelings, right? We interpret anything that makes us uncomfortable as a threat, and that we can't listen to others' opinions without getting defensive or lashing out. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So, this all comes from the fact that we are not trained in emotional intelligence. We don't learn as children the skills we need that are emotionally intelligent skills. You guys all at one point knew how to calculate the hypotenuse of a triangle. Whether you remember that now or not is irrelevant, but we all learned that skill, but we never learned the skill of understanding our emotions. And it is indeed a skill that is not taught. And because we've never learned it, we are operating now as humanity as these people that are all kind of brain, cognitive, linear thinking without being grounded in the emotional awareness of what we're feeling when. And when we don't know what we're feeling when, we interpret every single thing that happens to us as an emotional trigger. It can be a trigger, and if we don't recognize it as a trigger, and we don't realize that we're triggered in the moment, then instead of being conscious people who are acting from love, we go into an unconscious state where we are reacting from an old habituated pattern of woundedness. And that's what I meant when I said we're at this crossroads. Without the emotional intelligence piece, we just react defensively. So, what that means for anti-racism is, so I'm white. That's my experience. But it's very easy for me to get defensive when I hear about white privilege. Now, I can recognize the systemic racism that I never have to deal with. I mean, I never, ever have to worry about being pulled over by a police officer. I never, ever have. There's a lot of that, so I recognize it, but still I hear those words, white privilege. What that brings up in me is stuff that has nothing to do with my race. It has to do with, and I'm just talking personally, this, please hear, this has nothing to do with any of you, but I want to share my personal experience. I was raised as an only child, and so I heard from cousins and things that I was a privileged, spoiled brat because I was an only child. So when I hear white privilege, when I am not emotionally intelligent, I hear that old baggage and I get defensive. I'm not privileged. I've got this, I've got that. I have to examine that. I have to realize that that has nothing to do with the conversation of race and everything to do with my own emotional triggers from my personal upbringing. So if I'm not emotionally intelligent and we're trying to have a reasonable conversation about race and someone, to me personally, uses the phrase white privilege, I have to be really careful that I am not just reacting from my personal experience of being an only child and being called spoiled and privileged because of that. I have to realize that what we're talking about is something completely different, and I have to separate emotionally all of my personal triggers from my own childhood experience to the conversation at hand, which has nothing to do with my childhood experience.
Thank you. Gail had a question here. I want to.
Yeah, I said I will go through a checklist. That's kind of coming up next.
Oh, okay. 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 just real fast, Elaine sent me a message. You also talked about the four aspects of emotional, of EQ. Elaine says, I love her to talk about those, the four aspects of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and that's kind of the bulk of what I want to talk about here is the four aspects of emotional intelligence. And it kind of goes to Gail's question also about the checklist, because these four aspects are crucial. So they're broken down. I wish I had thought to send Lane and Eugene a slide, but I didn't think of it till right now. But if you look at it as on a T matrix, there are two aspects that are about what I see, and there are two aspects about what I do. And then on the opposite matrix, there's two aspects about me personally and two aspects about how I interact with others. So I'm going to go through all four of them, and this will be obvious as I go through. So the first aspect of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Self-awareness. And this is, what am I feeling when? Now, I want to be very clear. This has nothing to do with how you got to be feeling this way. All self-awareness is what I'm feeling when. So most of us have trouble with this. Now, you may not think so. You may know, I know pretty much when I'm sad or when I'm angry or when I'm happy, but there are subtle feelings that go through us all the time that have been taught, we've been conditioned by society and maybe our upbringing to ignore. If you ever heard big boys don't cry, if you ever heard it's not ladylike to get angry, if you ever heard any of these things, you have been conditioned to disconnect from your own awareness of your feelings. Notice I said your own awareness of your feelings, not your feelings. You're still feeling it. You have just disconnected your awareness. So I'm going to say everybody's probably had this experience. When you're watching someone who's on the verge of a temper tantrum and you say, why are you mad? And they say, I'm not mad. And you kind of go, oh, really? Because all of your behavior looks like you're mad. We all do that because we have been conditioned to disconnect from those emotions. So the first thing about emotional intelligence is to know what you're feeling when. Now, I caution you about questioning how you got to feel that way. That is a really good analysis to do in depth with a therapist or a practitioner or a minister or something like that. But in the moment, don't ask how I got to be feeling this way. Just know what you're feeling and when, because it's very simple. If you are trying to identify how you're feeling and you come up with, well, I think I'm going to keep using angry as an example. I think I'm feeling angry. If you go to how, it's very simple to lose focus on your self-awareness and turn it outward to, well, Eugene just pissed me off. And then you lose all the value of self-awareness, and it stops being about responsibility for your emotions, and it starts being about blame to the person you're with. So the first piece of self-awareness is what you're feeling when. So just what and when. So one thing you can do for this is use your body. Start noticing, where in your body do you feel things? I will tell you, your brain will lie to you all day long, but your body will tell you the truth 100% of the time. Your brain will sit there and tell you you're not mad while your stomach is churning and your palms are sweating and your jaws are gritting. So part of self-awareness is checking in with your body and learning your own cues. I'm a crier. Not that sweet, sentimental, cute cry. It's when I get mad, I cannot hold it back and I just cry. And it's embarrassing. And as a professional woman, it was terrible. I would be in rooms filled with men. I was always young. I was a college professor at age 37, and I'd be in a room with a bunch of men in their 60s. And of course, that was condescending. And, I was the young pup who didn't know what I was talking about. And then I would make matters worse by they'd say something to make me mad. And what would I do? I'd cry. Like, is that even worse? I had to get really clear to be self-aware enough to know when I was angry enough to be on the verge of tears so that I could place a well-timed restroom break right there so that I could go compose myself before I came back into the room. So that's self-awareness. Know what you're feeling when. I'm going to pause. I know that there's going to be time at the end for questions, so I don't want to take broad questions, but if there's a question on just this topic, self-awareness, that I haven't addressed right now, I would be happy to address it. If someone either wants to do it in the chat, or if you want to save it up for the end, we can do that. I'm not seeing anything on self-awareness, so good. Okay, I'm going to move on. So number 2 then is self-management. Self-management. Self-management is not only knowing what you're feeling when, but then assessing the appropriate response. Now, here's what this is not. This is not stuffing your feelings. This is not pretending you don't feel it. This is not a spiritual bypass of acting like it's not happening. That is not what self-management is. But on the flip side, it's not okay to grow up all over the other person. So self-management is me, for example, recognizing that I have a trigger about the word privilege and being able to have a conversation about white privilege and manage my reactions so that I am not upset and I recognize that nobody's calling me a spoiled brat. They're just using a term that's used in the culture for a certain systemic condition in our society. So I can go deal with my own triggers later, but I can manage myself to have the conversation. Another piece of self-management is recognizing the example I just gave you when I was about to cry in a meeting. And I could excuse myself, use the restroom, calm down, compose myself, and come back in a way that I could be solution-oriented. Now, I think that spiritual people have a real problem with self-management. And I say this a lot because we spend a lot of time embracing our authentic selves and loving our authentic selves and wanting everyone else to love us for our authenticity. And that is wonderful. That is good. That is valuable, but it is not an excuse. So if you have a poor self-management moment and you lose your temper or you lash out at someone or you blame someone, they don't have to love you anyway. They get to have their own reaction of being upset and you have to go clean it up. Because good self-management means that you wouldn't have lashed out in the first place. You would know what you were feeling when and either excused yourself, taken a deep breath, if you want to be really authentic, if you want someone to love you in your authenticity, try looking at them when they trigger you and say, I'm sorry, I'm feeling really triggered right now because you just said something that reminded me of my abusive mother. And, you know, I'm feeling really triggered and I don't think it's your fault, but I'm feeling it and I'm afraid I'm going to lash out on you. So can we just take a time out for me to calm down? Now that's authentic communication. That's good self-management. So self-management is being able to operate in the world without blame, without lashing out at someone else, without feeling like you are being victimized. Self-management is recognizing where the triggers come from. And that's not to say that you have never been victimized. I think we all have experiences somewhere in our life where we've been victimized. But it's probably not right now in this conversation. And so can you recognize that and manage it to a point where you can work with the emotions in one way and manage yourself to operate as an effective person in life going forward? So that's self-management. Again, I'll pause to just see if there's any questions about self-management.
You know, Dr. Morley, one of the things that I would just love to be able to say, just to remind people, is that you're not telling people to don't feel what they're feeling,
Yes.
ignore what they're feeling, stuff down your feelings. That's not what you're saying, right? Because there's that's where the damage comes really, and then we end up exploding all over the place. Because absolutely, we all have these feelings, and we have these tender spots. And so you're saying know your tender spots, absolutely take care of yourself, and manage your response. It's not that we are saying you shouldn't feel that way, because that's part of the problem, right?
Absolutely, Lane, and thank you for bringing that up. That is absolutely right, and I can't say it enough. I'm assuming that kind of in our culture, our pendulum has swung kind of far, and I mean our culture meaning the people on this call. I don't mean the broader American culture. I mean kind of the spiritual culture, that our pendulum has swung so far that we are feeling our feelings, and sometimes we are inappropriately spewing them out everywhere else, But yes, feel your feelings. That's why I gave the example of, if you really want to have an authentic conversation with someone, tell them actually what you're feeling. Don't just get angry and lash out. Say, God, I'm feeling really angry right now. I want to lash out at you. And I kind of have a sense it's not your fault, but I'm feeling really conflicted and really upset and really weepy right now. And I'm not sure why. So can we pause while I process through this, or can we take a break? That's the opposite. That's not only acknowledging what you're feeling and feeling all of it, but taking responsibility for what you're feeling and managing it to the best you can in that moment.
Well, the reason I brought it up was just because, and you know this because we've had this conversation, and that's why you're on the show, that Black people and everyone, marginalized persons, are always told not to feel the way they feel.
Correct.
It's kind of the gaslighting that says there's nothing going on here. So whatever you're feeling is invalid, right? And so so that's why I brought that up. Kind of like, it's not about don't feel that way. It is about not being triggered and feeling what you're feeling, but don't be used by your feelings. Don't be used by your feelings. Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't let your feelings take control of your higher wisdom self. We kind of want to show up in life as our higher wisdom self. There are places where it's totally appropriate to show up as the wounded person. They're totally appropriate, and there are times and places where it is. Maybe at work in the middle of a business meeting isn't the time or place, maybe. Or, with an interaction with your family, maybe. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of examples from my own life. You guys, I'm sure, have examples from your own life. So no, you absolutely have to feel your feelings. And that's why self-awareness is the very first concept in our 4 strategies of emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is number 1, because you have to know what you're feeling when first, and be able to acknowledge it, respect it, embrace it, process it, and then you can manage it. I think that the whole emotional intelligence paradigm comes from the sense that we are emotionally unintelligent. Yeah, Felicia, I see. I'll get there in 1 sec. I see that it is that we are emotionally unintelligent because we don't know what we're feeling when. And so these triggers are unconscious. And we don't even know that we're lashing out at people. We don't even know that we're blaming other people. We don't even know or understand it. And when we don't know or understand something, that's when it's dangerous. I used to say when I worked in addiction stuff, nothing pretty grows in the dark. So it's bringing it up into the light. So I saw Felicia's hand. Can they unmute themselves, you guys? I don't know if you guys as a host have to do it, or okay. So go ahead, Felicia.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating this conversation, and I'm recognizing that there's a level of survival that's at a critical place in this self-management. As the only woman in a business school, it wasn't the place for me to get angry or burst into tears. As a Black woman stopped by a police officer, it's not safe. I can feel and be aware of my feelings, but all of a sudden in that moment, self-management means the difference of whether I live or die.
Yes.
And so I believe that there are some levels of this that are ingrained that we don't even recognize that's what we're doing, because it's so completely tied to our ability to either survive or thrive in an environment that was not designed for us as women or as people of color.
Yes. I would agree absolutely with you. And I think that it's a testament to the self-management skills that you have navigated those, so clearly you haven't imploded yet, or, I don't know if you've been hauled off to jail inappropriately, but I'm going to assume not, since you gave the example that. So, you've been good at that self-management. I think that what emotional intelligence is it's recognizing that you're doing it. It's recognizing that you are managing yourself, and then making sure that you circle back. It's back to what Lane brought up. Don't just say, oh, I had to go, I'll tell you that situation that I gave earlier, when I'd have to leave the room with all the older male professors, to go cry, to go get myself in order and then come back and finish the meeting. I went home and then laid on the bed and cried. I mean, I didn't just stuff it and say, okay, that's done. Phew. I went back and cried and raged at the fact that this system was so unfair, and that, it made me feel so less than, and how dare they? And, I've got the same PhD they do, doggone it. And just because I have boobs doesn't make me any, blah, blah, blah. So I went back and processed it. I didn't ignore it or stuff it, but in the moment when I had to manage it, I could. And then I was aware enough to know I was still feeling it, and I circled back to process it. So that circle back phase of self-awareness, again, what are you feeling when? So if you leave the room and you've got it managed, under control, whew, I'm done, I feel great, then good. But if you're still churned up and you find yourself driving and grumbling, circle back and process it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something I've had to do many, many, many times. And I will say, what happens from the outside, from other people observing me, they never know the damage or the trigger that they have incited or anything else, if there's not a later additional circling back. And to me, that's where the interpersonal growth happens, as opposed to it all being on me to recognize it, to manage it, to circle back, to work it through, and then to come back looking pretty.
Well, that's a perfect segue into number 3, which is social awareness. So social awareness. So perfect
Dr. Judy,
segue.
Dr. Judy, hang on one moment. I want to make sure that Dean gets your question in around this one.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to tag on to what Felicia was saying. I think that African Americans have been greatly punished for expressing feelings of honesty. And this had its roots on the plantation, where no matter how brutally you were treated, if you complained, you could be killed. Nowadays, if you can complain, you can lose your job. And at some point, the flip side of that is white fragility. At some point, whites are going to have to lose their fragility, because we are tired of keeping quiet in the face of abuse.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, thank you, Eugene. Then that moves to number 3, which is social awareness, which is exactly what we're talking about now with the interpersonal piece. And this is where true anti-racism and activism comes in. We start with the self because everything starts with the self. Everything starts with the self. The world feels very much like it's out there, but every emotional thing starts with us. We always can choose how we react. Now, that doesn't excuse bad behavior. It doesn't excuse abuse. It doesn't excuse racism. It doesn't excuse any of that. But the fact of the matter is that with self-awareness and self-management, we can choose how we react. But social awareness and relationship management are the next 2. And this is now the interpersonal piece of emotional intelligence. So number 3, we're going to start with social awareness. And social awareness is about being aware of how our actions impact others and the reactions of others around us. It's being aware of this. I'll give a great example on myself, which is it's a terrible example. It's a horrible example for me, but this is bad social awareness. This is poor social awareness. It has nothing to do with racism, but it's bad social awareness. I have some coaching clients. I see them every Thursday night at 8, okay? And they have an elderly dog. And so usually in the middle of our coaching session, we have to stop so that they can take the elderly dog out to use the bathroom, right? Well, because of the 4th of July weekend, I hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks. So over the 4th of July weekend, I got a new puppy. And I had talked to them about the new puppy, and we talked about it. So the first thing that happens when we get on the call last Thursday night is I show them my puppy. I have my puppy up here with me, and I'm like, oh, you guys, I want to show you my puppy. I want to introduce Maisie to Barney. Well, Barney crossed the Rainbow Bridge the week before. Horrible social awareness on my part. I knew this was an 18-year-old dog. How stupid could I be? I should have asked how Barney was, gotten the scoop, and then taken the puppy away and not done anything else. That was bad social awareness on my part.
Right up here, but they're underneath.
So it's not about taking care of other people. I don't want anyone to hear codependency or anything dysfunctional, but it is about putting ourselves in the other person's shoes for 2 seconds and thinking about what they might be experiencing in this situation and how this situation might look from their perspective, rather than being so excited about us and who we are. I mean, we as Americans are a lot of things. We're strong and brave and beautiful and handsome and, intelligent, but we're pretty self-centered. It's all about me, 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 me. Do you know how many languages the average European speaks? The average European speaks 3 languages going on to 4. Do you know how many languages the average American speaks? 1. Well, half a language if you take out the profanity. But 1. So we are usually very self-centered. So when we come to an interaction, we are trained. And I want to stress that these emotional intelligence things are skills. They are behaviors that we have been conditioned for. And so we are trained to come at them from our perspective and our perspective only. And so we don't think about what the other person is thinking, or how they might view the situation, or how they might watch a movie and take a different meaning than we do from it, or how they might see a comment that we think is totally innocent, that our parents use, that our grandparents use, that how they might take that as insulting. We just don't. So social awareness is the skill of stopping for a moment and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Had I taken a deep breath before my coaching call last Thursday night and remembered that these clients for months have had an elderly sick dog that is on his last legs, and asked about him first rather than being so excited to show off my new baby puppy, I could have avoided a really hurtful situation. But I didn't take the time. So it's about taking the time. So how does that play into anti-racism? White folks on the call, not everyone sees things like we do. Hello. It's about taking the time to think, what could this phrase? For example, I had been raised to use the phrase when it came to leadership, to use the phrase that this organization has too many chiefs and not enough Indians. People used it. My parents used it. We used it. So I go into leadership in an organization and Centers for Spiritual Living, and we have this really top-heavy structure, and on a call, conditioned response, no thought, Didn't mean anything by it, but out of my mouth comes, I think we have too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Whoa, you know? So I have to stop and take, now, sure, can I use the excuse? Well, you know what? I didn't mean anything by it. My parents used it. I mean, it's just a phrase in our culture. I didn't mean to offend anybody. And is that true? Yes, that's true. But that does not excuse my lack of social awareness. It doesn't excuse my lack of social awareness, because had I taken a pause and thought, how could this phrase be construed by someone on this call who might be Native American, who might be a person of color, who might have Native American blood in their family? Had I taken that pause, which is a skill, it's a skill to learn to stop, think through what you're going to say. It only takes a fraction of a second before it comes out your mouth. So that is social awareness. How might someone with a different background, so I am a middle-class white female. How could an upper-class Black male or a lower-class Asian male, how might they see this comment I'm about to make? How might they look at this situation? How might they think about this? I may not know exactly, but I can project myself into the situation enough to give pause and check what I say. So that's social awareness. And now let me move on to the last one, since we're getting close to the end, to relationship management, and then we'll open it up for questions. The relationship management piece is recognizing that you're not going to like everyone. You don't have to like everyone, and they don't have to like you. But if you are forced into a situation with them, for example, if they're a work colleague, or if you sit on a board together, or whatever your relationship might be, you have a goal of that relationship that you have to respect. And so you have to show up appropriately, recognizing that you aren't going to change the other person and that you don't have to change, but you have a job to get done. So here's an example that I love to use. I'm not being political. I am not stating any preference for any political party. But let's just say that you serve on a board with someone and you are a staunch Democrat who thinks that Joe Biden is the way for the future, and you have a colleague who wears Trump 2020 everything and Make America Great Again gear. You're probably not going to change this person to vote for Joe Biden. Nor do you need to suddenly want to vote for Donald Trump. But you do need to be able to manage your relationship well enough that you can effectively work on the project, serve on the board, get done what you need to get done. And that comes from listening without making the other person wrong. And if they try to make you wrong, you got to go back to your own self-awareness and self-management, not stuff your feelings, but say, look, I respect how you feel. I don't feel like you're respecting how I feel. So we need to drop this topic and move on with whatever the project is. Can you be angry? Sure. You're allowed to be angry. You probably will be angry. But is getting angry and causing a rift in the relationship at that point going to achieve the goal at hand? Probably not. Now, this is all a fine line between stuffing your feelings and acting like they're not there, and being authentic and real and managing. So what we don't want to be is we don't want to be a bundle of triggers waiting to be pushed. We don't want to be that, right? That's the self-awareness part. We don't want to be a bundle of triggers waiting to be pushed. So if you're a bundle of triggers waiting to be pushed, you got to look at that. That's a self-awareness piece. And once you look at that, then you can come up with ways to manage them. Not stuff them, not pretend that they don't exist, but work on disconnecting them. That may take work with a practitioner, a minister, a therapist, or whatever, but work on disconnecting the triggers so that they don't get you. The social awareness piece is broadening your perspective to ask yourself, who else is in this room? Who else is on this Zoom call? And how might they look at a comment? How might they see a situation? What might their experience be? And if I really can't even fathom, then I have to admit, I can't even fathom this. But I respect whatever it is regardless. Even if I can't relate, I respect it. And then you have to let them be them and you be you, even if you find something about them offensive or disagreeable. You have to determine what is the relationship at hand, and you have to work around your own emotions to achieve the goal. And then you don't have to like them. You don't have to be friends with them. You don't have to go out for drinks. You know, you don't have to invite them to your daughter's wedding, but you have to achieve the goal at hand. So one of the things that, well, let me just stop there. So just a quick recap, the 4 aspects of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, and the biggest ones for anti-racism, well, no, I'm going to say they're all big for anti-racism, really, but the for social justice and activism are social awareness and relationship management. You know, I belong to an organization called Braver Angels. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but they are committed to bringing Democrats and Republicans together for conversation. And so they facilitate conversations all over the United States. And every one of these conversations has a red representative and a blue representative. And for the longest time in my region, both the red representative and the blue representative's names were Karen. So, but it was very obvious which Karen you got the email from within the opening line. And yet there was great love and mutual respect between the 2 Karens. They never dissed each other. Even through this horrible contentious election of 2020, neither one of them said anything negative about the opposite party. They all realized that we want the same things. And I guess that is the ultimate of relationship management when it comes to anti-racism. Certainly everyone on this call, and I am going to say the majority of Americans, not all, but the majority of Americans want a fair, just, equitable society. That's the end goal. Do we have a million different opinions about how to get there and whose fault it is that we're not and why we're not and what happened and our history and all? Yes, we do. But I think we all, many want this fair, equitable society. And so how do we practice self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management so that we can all get to the same goal and not get bogged down in the different points of view as to why we are where we are? And I think that's kind of the bottom line of relationship management. So that's it in a nutshell. That wasn't much of a nutshell, right? That was a really big nutshell.
That's a large nutshell. Thank you, Dr. Judy. Tyrone, I see your hand up, and I know that you had that up during the last...
Oh, my apologies. I don't have everyone on my screen, so I am so sorry that I'm missing you with your hands up.
That's why I'm here. It's okay. Tyrone.
Good morning, Dr. Morley. Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate your passionate perspective. I think it's very passionate, and thank you. How do you counter these arguments? I'm calling it the defensive narrative, right? Mm-hmm. I don't see race. I'm tired of everybody talking about race. Mm-hmm. You know, why do I have to follow political correctness, PC? Mm-hmm. You know, so many feelings are thrown into this jar called political correctness. You're stepping on my freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. You know, you're trying to tell me how I gotta think. How do you counter those arguments?
Well, I don't. So that's a big question, Tyrone. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna answer it just from the emotional intelligence perspective, okay? Because what I recognize is I can't. So the people who say that, I'm not gonna change their mind. I'm not going to change their mind. They believe what they believe. But what I am going to do is I'm going to recognize that those arguments trigger me. They piss me off. And I'm going to manage it myself. I'm just going to give a personal example. I'm going to manage it by calmly and rationally telling that person why that argument triggers me. I think that that argument is a cop-out for them to not deal with their own hidden beliefs. And so I get triggered when I hear that. I'm not saying you're a bad person, Tyrone. I'm going to just pretend you're the person who's saying that, okay? I'm going to do a little role play with you. I'm not saying you're a bad person, you know, but those arguments trigger me because I don't think they're true. I think that they signal a lot of unexamined beliefs on your part. And so that makes me angry. But, you know, you're probably a great person who really believes passionately in what you're doing. I don't know you, but I do believe that those are offensive to me. And so if I'm stepping on your freedom, you're stepping on mine. How do we work this out together? Now let's do the social awareness piece. I'd love to hear your perspective more. You're muted, Tyrone, so let me finish. From a social awareness piece, how do we work this out? Tell me more about why you feel so threatened, because why am I such a threat? And I'd like to, the same thing you do, I'd like a society where we can speak freely and where we can all speak our mind and feel that justice. And I don't have it right now. So I don't want to take it away from you. Lord knows I'm not trying to take it away from you, but how do we get there? Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, if I was in that position, my response would be, well, I think you're being patronizing. I think you're trying to tell me how to think. That would be first. Secondly, I reject your premises, you know, that you're using in the beginning. So let's just agree to disagree. And that's what I'm kind of hearing to some extent you're saying. I don't think that promotes growth in working through race concerns and issues. I get that you have to start with yourself, and I totally get that. And in fact, I totally agree with that, you know. But I just want to throw that other part out because based on how you responded to me, you're making a lot of assumptions that, one, I feel threatened. And I probably do, but I don't know it, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, you're presenting those things. And then so there's a comeback to that. And maybe you're right. Maybe we don't need to have this conversation at all.
Well, but that's the thing. We need to have the conversation. So the second piece that I said on social awareness is, let's talk about it. What I hear you saying, Tyrone, is that you want your freedom and that you feel like this political correctness is infringing on your freedom. And, you know, I want my freedom too. And I want the freedom to not feel, you know, whatever is I'm feeling, you know, in our society. And so it sounds like we want exactly the same thing. So let's have a conversation about how we can both get what we want out of here. This doesn't have to be a win-lose. Let's talk about how we can make it a win-win. And the other person will either be receptive to that or they will be shut down. But you've done as far as you can go to open the door and to express what you need to express in an emotionally intelligent, non-confrontational way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jason.
Yeah, thank you. I've been struggling with something for a long time, and you really kind of brought it to a head for me a few minutes ago, Dr. Judy, when you were talking about, you know, a Democrat and a Republican and essentially aiming for the same goals, but having very different ideas about how to get there. And for me, the Republican Party of maybe 10 or 20 years ago may have been that. But when I look at it now, you know, I really try to see, you know, the essential goodness in every person. And I think that is in there somewhere. And yet, the Republican Party has embraced racism as a policy, as far as I'm concerned. You know, when you're willing to support someone like Donald Trump, who is blatantly racist and incites racist energies and feelings in people, and when the current Republican Party is doing their very best to undermine voting rights all over the country and disenfranchise people of color, I noticed that it's hard for me to trust the goodwill of the other person. I'm like, how I want to trust your goodwill, but I can't see how goodwill translates here, you know, that people can support the big lie. And so I'm just curious about how, I don't know if you see that the same way I do or not, but for me, there's like there's something fundamentally broken now. And, you know, there have been, you know, I think of George Will. George Will is a very conservative person with whom I disagree about almost everything. But when he saw the way the Republican Party was going, he quit the party. And I think, okay, so there's a person who has some sort of integrity about him, even though I disagree with him about almost everything. He was not willing to support the big lie. And so I think, okay, that's a person I could still, I think, have a conversation with where I trust his good intent, even though I completely disagree with him about almost everything. So I think I've said enough. I'm curious about yours. How do you get there? Because I have trouble getting there from here.
So I listen. It's that social awareness and relationship management. I listen. So the house that I live in right now was built by a lovely couple. I live in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and they're still in the area. And the woman works nearby, and we've maintained kind of a social friendship. But I've noticed over the last year by her social media posts that she is one of the people you're talking about. We went to dinner about, what was it, Eugene, when you saw us about a month ago? Anyway, we went to dinner about a month ago together to just talk about crafting and woodworking and our hobbies and our kids. And then toward the end, she brought up politics. And I said, look, personally, I'm an independent. I think there's issues on both sides of the spectrum. But frankly, I can't believe you voted for Donald Trump. And she said, I can't either. But what was I going to do? I'm a Republican and I believe in the planks of the Republican Party. And I don't like the man either, but he was my only choice. So my point there is not to excuse any of that. My point is, when we talk to people on an individual level, we get beyond all of this. This woman, by the way, her daughter-in-law is African American. So her grandchildren are mixed race. So I'm certain she's not a racist. But she voted for Donald Trump. So I think that the point is always bring it to the individual first. We're not going to change systems all at once. We're going to change hearts and minds in smaller groups and interpersonally by listening and by speaking our truth to them. So we can't look at Donald Trump and all the people who are following him and say everything's broken, or I mean, we can. That's something beyond fixing. But I can reach out to my neighbor who voted for President Trump and tell her how I feel and why, and listen to what her fears are. I want to bring up a guy. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of this guy. His name is Theo Wilson. Has anyone ever heard of Theo Wilson? Somebody's saying yes. Is that Eugene?
That was me. Yeah, I know
Okay.
Theo. Yeah.
So Theo Wilson's from Denver, Colorado. He's a Black comedian and actor. And
he's a great poet.
And I don't know what made him think to do this, but he was on Facebook, and you know, most of his friends on Facebook were African American men, and you know, they were talking about their fears and their concerns about the culture and the government, and they were all afraid of being, you know, disenfranchised and being afraid of being attacked and disempowered, and you know, I probably don't need to tell the Black men here what these fears are, you know, I not being able to relate to them, but he found that. And something made him triggered him to do something. And so he created a different Facebook profile under a different name. And instead of a photograph, he did a caricature of a white supremacist. And he started just kind of trolling the white supremacist sites. And of course, with the algorithms that Facebook uses, pretty soon that new fake profile started getting all the white supremacist stuff coming. And so he had his real profile of himself as a Black man and all of the things that are, that his community, the community of his peers are feeling. And then he had this white supremacist profile. And he said it took him a while to be able to read these posts. But after a while, you know what he learned? They both fear the same things. They both want the same things. They want to be able to get a job, but are afraid that they won't be able to. They want to have security for their family, but are afraid that they won't be able to provide that security. The difference is they blame one another, the two groups, for it. So he started this whole program, like the Braver Angels thing, where he actually did this at a barbershop in Denver, where he sent out an invitation to a party to both his Facebook groups without either of them knowing it. And they all showed up. And he facilitated a conversation that started out very ugly and turned into something really beautiful. So I guess that the point of bringing that up, and to Jason's question, is it comes back to this one-on-one individual. We have to talk to people. We have to reach out to people. We have to reach out to people of a different race. We have to understand, we have to not be afraid to say what we're feeling. And we have to find that safe space. Obviously, back to Felicia's example, if you're Black and you're being pulled over by a policeman, that may not be the safest space to do it. So don't hear me being insensitive there. I hope I wasn't. But when you find that safe space, you have to be able to reach out. You have to be able to talk, ask questions, listen, really hear, and recognize that probably at the end of the day, we are all humans who want and care about the same things, with vastly different experiences, vastly different generational traumas, vastly different perspectives that we can understand and respect without making wrong.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have Neil and then we have Colleen. But before we go there, I want to say, you were speaking about, we want to listen, right? And every time I hear that we want to listen. And for me, it's like, well, listening from a different paradigm, listening from a different place from where I may have grown up, which is being aware of my own feelings. Otherwise, I'm going to still hear it from that place of being wounded. Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Good point.
Neil, I was going to read your what you put in the chat, so I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw Lane's post, so I decided to go with it. I've got a practical question with regard to social awareness and the example you gave of the too many cheats. I can't pause every few words when I'm speaking. Yeah. So how do I develop the awareness to recognize when something I'm about to say deserves that pause and self-reflection?
That's an excellent question. So there are a couple things I want to say to answer that. First of all, know that you're going to mess up. And when you do, own it. Like me with the clients and the dog. I messed up. Here I am, Miss Certified Emotional Intelligence Trainer. That was a biggie. Duh. So know that you're going to mess up. Know that those insensitive remarks are going to come out of your mouth because you're human. And but have the social awareness to see how it lands. If you make one of those comments and you see that you've hurt someone, clean it up immediately. Like, oh my God, I just realized how that must sound to you. I am so sorry. That was my own cultural bias. I apologize. So that's number one. So know you're going to make mistakes. And when you do, clean it up. The second thing, we all talk to ourselves. We all think to ourselves. And we think in the same way we talk. So when you're in situations and you're thinking these things, try to notice. It's all it is practice. It's the same way. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So think about it. Notice, I used to, again, another phrase came from my father, good man, probably a racist. We never talked about race in my family, so I don't know. But, call a spade a spade. I thought he was talking about the cards. I literally didn't know that there was any other meaning to that, really. But one time I heard it in my own head. I was thinking about what I was going to say in a conversation, and it came in my head, and I was like, I wonder, that phrase just suddenly strikes me as odd. I wonder what the etymology of that is, So it's just practicing in your own head too. So, it's and trial and error. You're right. You can't stop every few seconds. Those times when you catch yourself, count it as a win. The times when you don't, forgive yourself immediately and clean it up if you've offended someone. And those times where you're listening to another conversation and you're watching, watch how many times you see someone else do this and you go, oh, bad, bad, bad. He shouldn't have said that. Oh, that's going to be bad. Uh-oh. And then make that mental note and go, okay, now I saw how that one happened. I'm going to make the mental note for myself next time.
So one thing I hear that's very important is when I'm speaking, sometimes I'm focused on what I'm saying. And what I need to do is pay more attention to the reactions and senses of the people with whom I'm speaking.
Yes, that's exactly, Neil. That's the social awareness. That's the social awareness. How's it landing?
Thank you. We have Colleen, and then we have Marcy.
So my question is in the chat, but for purposes of this exchange, a white activist was in a meeting with me with some government officials, and she called out a Black woman who was standing in for her white boss. And I was offended because I felt she put the Black woman in a bad position. And I indicated that, and she was furious. She said, I should not shut her up because she's been an activist for 20 years fighting anti-racism. So my question is, what do you do about that?
Well, I have so much to say about that, but from an emotional intelligence perspective, well, let me ask, what did you say when she said you shouldn't be, I've been an activist all this time and you shouldn't silence me or whatever?
It sounded like a shush, that's not appropriate kind of thing. And she was offended. She feels that she is entitled to speak because she has been fighting anti-racism for 20 years. And she should be entitled to say what she wants to say when she wants to say.
Yeah. Well, that's just incorrect. And that is bad self-management on her part. That is poor self-management on her part and a lack of social awareness on her part that she didn't recognize, again, the reaction, that she was so self-absorbed to it that she didn't recognize the reaction to how that landed with you, with the woman who was standing in for her boss. So that was poor on her part. For your part, kudos to you for speaking up. That is very good self-management, self-awareness and self-management. You realized that you were upset by it and you spoke out without, I'm making the assumption that you didn't, have a tantrum about it, that you spoke out in a professional and appropriate way. Sounds like you must have,
I did.
Yeah. And so that sounds like excellent self-management on your part. And so I would say that in that you handled it exactly right. If you had wanted to take it a step farther, you could have said that, her, something very modulated, but her years of activism experience does not dictate your emotional response, and that you did find that to still be inappropriate. And, we can agree to disagree. If you'd want to take it a step farther, but it does feel like you followed it well, and like you might want to send her to one of my emotional intelligence trainings.
Actually, the irony is she's a clinical social worker.
Here's what I found. So I am an ordained minister with Centers for Spiritual Living. I've been in the spiritual world for many, many years. I've been in academia. I have been in recovery circles. It does not matter how much intellectual training you have. If you can have a PhD in psychology, you can have, you know, a master's in social work. Emotional intelligence is a skill that takes practice. And if you haven't committed to the practice of it, you can know as much about it as anyone and not be good at it.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Before I go to Marcy, Sheila Smith wanted me to ask this question. One of my white coworkers said years ago, in a Coons Day, Sheila I was highly offended, and I told her that is a racist and derogatory statement, and I explained why. She burst into tears and said she did not know, and that she now, and now she said, what? She did not know that, and now she did not feel safe. What do you do with this?
The whole safe issue. Sheila, I'm glad you brought that up. This is going to sound kind of tough love. It's not our job to make someone else feel safe.
That's right.
That's where self-awareness and self-management comes in. That's where self-awareness comes in. It's our job to be empathetic. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry you don't feel safe. I guess I can understand that. But it's not our job to fix that. Safety comes from within each of us. And it's a practice. Again, I have to keep saying it's a practice. We all have reasons not to feel safe. We have all been in situations where something out there has made us not feel safe. So it is a practice to feel safe. But again, I just want to congratulate you, Sheila, for speaking your truth and doing exactly what good emotional intelligence would dictate. You were self-aware enough to know you were offended. You managed it in a way by speaking your truth. I'm guessing, totally guessing that you triggered something in her, that it was her own guilt, white guilt, or, you know, whatever it was. But when it comes to her not feeling safe, you know, the best thing you can say is, well, that certainly wasn't my intention. I hope you feel like you can tell me anything and know that I will respond accordingly. And I don't think any less of you. I just had to tell you how that landed with me. And, you know, my apologize, you know, I guess I apologize that you don't feel safe, but I don't apologize for what I said because I didn't do anything wrong. Like, I feel bad that you don't feel safe from an empathetic perspective, but I'm not apologizing because I didn't really do anything wrong. And I hope you feel safe with me. If you don't, gosh, I just was trying to make you feel safer because you know where you'll stand with me always. And I don't think any less of you.
Yeah. Yeah, that feeling safe.
Yeah, you know, and I see Sheila, you said here in the chat, I'm sorry I'm not haven't been able to follow the chat as much, but yeah, you were the one that was offended. And she shouldn't have made it all about her, but we do. That's the me piece. That's the self-centeredness. We don't get this social awareness piece. So, yeah.
That's funny, right? I offend you, and then you tell me why you're offended, but now I don't feel safe because you told me.
And make me feel guilty for offending you because make me feel guilty because I said something offensive to you, right?
Right. I love people.
I do want to say though before, and I know Marcy has a question. One of the things that was in the chat earlier is how important it is not to invalidate the other person's feelings. So thank you, Judy, for saying, you know, yes, empathetic. Like, we are, part of being emotionally intelligent is to be empathetic to how someone else feels, and to say, I apologize for, you know, or I can understand how you might feel that way, but I don't, that's not on me, you know? Right. So it's very important not to invalidate the other person while we're self-validated. So thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely. Marcy Graham.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Morley, I just feel your passion coming through the screen in waves, and I'm grateful for how passionate you are on this topic. And something you said a little bit ago, I just wanted to explore a little bit more. You said, I believe, the neighbor that you went to lunch with to talk about woodworking, and you said that she had a African-American daughter-in-law or something. And of course she's not, I'm feeling my emotional response here. Of course she's not racist because of that. Now, I have 3 children that I adopted from Korea. So I have 3 Asian children, my grandchildren. I have 4 grandchildren that are part white and part Korean. And I noticed that there have been times when I'm going to out myself as used that to mean that I am not racist.
Right, yeah.
And that's not so. I can't help but be influenced by this culture that I swim in, of all of the ways that not just Asian people at all, but people of any color have been marginalized and hurt. And I'm noticing I'm feeling really charged, and it's not to say that what you said was, it bothers me that we think we can bypass that because of that. And I know from myself that I've used that. And then there was a moment when I went, oh my God, look what I just did. Mm-hmm. Somehow by thinking that I adopted children from another race and culture, that makes me immune to what the world has done to all the people that have been marginalized. And it's very disturbing to me that I did that, and that other people might assume, assumption is a very dangerous thing, assume because of what they see, I had, having a partner of a different race, making the assumption that then they're somehow not affected by, but the shit that goes on in the world. It's just not okay. So
yeah, and I really appreciate you bring that up, Marcy. And I apologize if I bypassed that rather quickly. Let me backpedal. I know this woman well, and I know that she is not a racist. As when it comes to one-on-one interpersonal relationships, I work near her. So I kind of use that as a shorthand in my talk to say she's got a Black daughter-in-law, she's not racist, but I do know the woman. Does she buy into the system of systemic racism that is perpetuated by her party? Absolutely. And that was what I wanted to call her on. But yeah, I appreciate you clarifying that and giving me the opportunity to clarify that. Just, I think for years, my stepdaughter is adopted from China. My husband and his first wife adopted her from China. Mm-hmm. And I think for years he used that as I'm not racist. I have a Chinese daughter as well. And I think now he's coming to terms with that too. So, you make a good point. And I think I've tried to say this several times. I think that there is a systemic problem in the United States of racism. And that's what we are trying to work with. And I think that the best, personally, I don't have answers, but for me, the best way for me personally to work with it is not to try to tackle the system. That feels too big. For me, it's to reach out to the people in my community of color. It's to reach out to people who have different upbringings than I do, who have different perspectives, and listen to them and hear how they are looking at things, and to understand their perspective, and to try to recognize that in my limited capacity, that I am just seeking to understand better so that I can be more equitable for everyone. And that doesn't make me not racist, because I do still benefit from white privilege. I do still pay my taxes that perpetuate the system. I am still part of it. But on that interpersonal one-on-one level, I'm trying to build bridges that will break this down.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Marcy, I don't know if you saw in the chat, so I just want to chat, but I want to also express what some of the people were saying. Number one is this: thank you for your vulnerability in speaking up. Right? Thank you so very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm reading the other comments. Yeah, thank you everyone for your comments. Yeah, my apologies if that statement was a trigger about her not being right. That was, for me, it was shorthand because I do know this woman well. I didn't mean it as much of a causal statement, like because she has a Black daughter-in-law, i.e. she is not racist. It was, she is not racist because I know her well. Oh, by the way, she has a Black daughter-in-law too. So my apologies that I phrased that badly.
Eugene, I love what can you pronounce your name, please? We have not met. Chemness Fisher. What is your name? How do you pronounce your name?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
It's chem like chemistry, ness like necessary. So chemness.
Thank you. Can you just say what you put in the chat, because I love it and I think it's important.
Oh, well, I said it's fruitless to point out a racist.
Yeah.
But it's more fruitful to point out racist behavior.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Very good. Very good. I'm gonna plagiarize the heck out of that. Thank you.
Oh, good.
I wanted to also say that there are multiple definitions of racism out there. And depending on what scholar you read or what camp you fall into, one can kind of look at themselves or at someone else as racist or not racist, depending on the definition that one espouses. And so I think it's important for us in our quest to become better citizens, to actually find out what's out there, to research and say, well, what is a racist? And because I think Eugene, remember we came up with that questionnaire or that little article when we first started this program a year ago about, are you a closet racist? Mm-hmm. Right? So that one. And just so people can start to look and see, oh, yes, what am I? What are my thoughts? What are my behaviors? Who are my friends? What are they doing? And so it is very important. This is all part of the process. I just so appreciate all of the honesty and vulnerability that's going on in this conversation this afternoon. Truly. Yeah, just thank everyone for being willing to say what's so for you and to have your voice heard, because that's what we're all here for. That's
emotional intelligence in action here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I had another statement, but I don't want to take us away from where we are in terms of Dr. Judy being here. And yeah, I'll just leave that alone for another time. Yeah, Dr. Judy, in our conversations, and we didn't get to this, I don't think. We were talking about generational trauma. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how emotional intelligence helps to untangle learned behaviors stemmed from that trauma. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Generational trauma is a learned behavior. I'm not saying it's a willingly learned behavior, but I am saying it's a conditioned behavior. We are born pure love. We are born pure love. We are not born with the trauma of this life. That is learned. And we have all sorts of, there's, tons and tons and tons of studies and research on that from a psychological perspective that show that that's learned behavior. And from an emotional intelligence perspective as well. It's any generational trauma, whether it's generational trauma from racism, whether it's generational trauma from abuse, whether it's generational trauma from addiction, it's all learned behavior. And because emotional intelligence is another learned behavior, it is a question. I'm going to make this sound so easy. I'm going to make it sound so easy. You just unlearn one behavior and relearn a new one. It's that simple. But of course, as we all know, it is not that easy. That is the answer. We have to unlearn the one behavior and relearn the other. This is a monumental task. Was it Neil earlier who said, I can't watch every word I'm saying? And, unlearning a behavior and relearning a new one is even worse, because you have to watch every thought. You have to watch every thought and every word and every action. It's a monumental task that can take time and energy, but it can be done. It can be done. And most of what it takes is a willingness. So the generational trauma is real. We have to acknowledge that the generational trauma is real. And we have to acknowledge and have a willingness to unlearn that behavior and relearn a different emotional intelligent behavior that doesn't take away anything from the emotions. The emotions are very real. We've lived with them. We all have coping strategies from being raised in whatever environment we were raised in. And these coping strategies are deep and real, but they are still behaviors. They are not the truth of who we are. And so identifying the coping strategies, identifying these learned behaviors. I do something, I don't know if Virgie's still on the call. I saw her on here earlier, but Virgie Cooper, I just did something with her community a couple of weeks ago called the Fear to Faith process. And I do this a lot because it's bringing up all of these coping strategies that are unconscious that we don't know we have from that generational trauma. It's bringing it up into the light so we recognize them when they're up so that we can work on healing them and implementing new behaviors in their wake, in their stead.
Great. And Virgie says it was excellent.
Oh, good.
We have.
Virgie, you are still on the call. You're not on my screen for whatever reason. So anyway, good.
All righty. Karen, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to suggest, and perhaps I'm just ignorant of this because I haven't heard it before, but I think instead of racism, we should be using the term otherism, because there are so many ways that we look at others as others. And ageism is also part of that. So I think we all have to be mindful of so many different things in our lives. And the otherism might be a more appropriate term for all these other things that we have learned through our childhood or just our experience. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. You know, I think that's exactly right, Karen. Ageism, sexism. I mean, you know, I've always been a woman in a man's profession. My first job was in an advertising agency that worked with car dealers. So I'm this 22-year-old woman dealing with 55-year-old men, car dealers, you know. Then I was a college professor at age 37. And then I was a pastor. I mean, I've always, so the isms, I agree. I do want to say something, though. I see in Race Talk Revolution that the tagline there behind Lane says, there is no revolution without love. One of the things I want to say about love, we have to recognize everyone's divinity. We have to recognize everyone's divinity. And we have to recognize that part of that divinity, if we're going to love them, we have to recognize that they are at their core human and loving. And I see something in the chat that says being a racist means you're a bad person. If we
Actually, that he just typed in that was a typo. He meant to say that does not mean.
Oh, good. Thank you, Tyrone. I was about to launch onto a soapbox because I was going to say we've got to approach this from the perspective that you're not a bad person. You are a misinformed, misguided, poorly socialized, emotionally unintelligent person who can learn better. But you're good. Okay, good. Okay, soapbox done then. Thank you, Tyrone. Woo! I was about to really launch on that one.
and that is a great spot, a great segue into this before I hand it back over to Lane. You know, as Dr. Judy said, you know, it is about appreciating, even if we're not in agreement with what someone says, but appreciating it and then coming from a place of love. Of course, loving yourself first, you know, loving yourself enough to speak up when something triggers you, but to do it from an emotional, intelligent way. But coming from that place of love, there can be no revolution without love, right? And it's that type of love that has us say, you know what? I can't stand for this, or I don't like what you just said. It triggered me. And that also is that type of love that has us, or has me, let me say it that way, that type of love that has me look at what I'm going to say. Because I may say something that might be hurtful. I will apologize for the way that I said it, but not for what I said. Right. So, but also it's about coming from that place of love, because one of the things that we want to really be clear on is that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
Lane.
Amen. Amen, brother. All right. I'm so glad, Dr. Judy Morley, thank you so much for visiting with us this afternoon. And I'm so glad that Tyrone put that typo, because that brought you to that issue of love, because what you said when Eugene and I were interviewing you last week, the last words you said was "with hearts in mind."
Yes.
And I just want you to wrap it up with that statement, right? This is all about having hearts in mind. And I think you may have already done that, but is there just one more tagline you want to put in there on that?
Well, I don't remember exactly what I said. I remember that you wrote it down last time, and I don't honestly remember what it was. But yes, I mean, you know, we have to be in touch with the heart. And that's what emotional intelligence is about. Emotional intelligence is about coming from the heart and not just the mind. It's about opening up to other human beings, regardless of their experience, with our hearts, and knowing that deep down, regardless of our life experience and, you know, our birth experience, where we were born, what our color is, any of that, regardless of that we all have the same brains. We all have the same function of our brains, and that we can get to that point where we are emotionally centered human beings, where we can touch each other's hearts more than just touch each other's minds, and, you know, do it from that place of love.
Thank you. And you have touched hearts this morning or this afternoon. I can tell you that. Absolutely. I think we've all been touched. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, Eugene, for your partnership. Next week, we will be joined by Fiona Oliphant, Esquire. She is the co-director of Healing Equity United. She'll lead us in a conversation about privilege and how each of us has privilege we may not even be aware of, and how our privilege can and does impact the people around us. So please join us for that program. Same bat time, same bat channel. Everyone have a brilliant, brilliant afternoon. Eugene?
What Lane said.
Take care, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Morley.
Thank you.
And so it is.
So it is.